Welcome to the SkirtWork podcast.
Hello, we're back at for SkirtWork, and it's been a while, Lisa, since we've been in the same room because, much to our partner's delight, we've both had lost our voices. And we're back on the it's cold and flu season here in Sydney at the moment, and we've both been afflicted. I'm a couple of weeks ahead of Lisa, but yes, so we are actually able to speak fluently.
Yes. And I'd like to point out this seems to happen to me every year, is that I get a respiratory virus just before I'm due to go and get a flu shot. And I just feel like, oh my God, the universe is against me.
Oh dear. But anyway, so we had a little brief hiatus purely because you wouldn't have been able to hear us. Now you may prefer that you can't hear us, but we are having to do this podcast, and so we have to do it so that we are actually audible.
That's exactly right. And I do want to apologise in advance that if I do cough, it's because it's just the hangover of this virus.
Yes, well, we'll just try and there might be a few editing blips. Who would know? But Lisa, so now that we're back on deck and in the same room at the same time, take us through what we're going to have a bit of a chat about today.
Well, today we're going to talk about a bit of a viral discussion that's gone through social media, and it's on this idea of lazy girl jobs
Yes, I loathe that topic.
versus girl boss jobs. And before we get into what that even means, can we both just agree what appalling labels to give to anything?
We were just talking about this before we came on air, and I think Lisa and I are going to be in furious agreement today. Oh boy, I mean, yeah. Where do you start?
It's, I read a little bit online about this, and I think it's absolutely true that you can try and have a label like girl boss, for example, and the idea is it's to empower women. It's an empowering term. Takes 30 seconds before it's denigrated and turned into something offensive. So can we just suggest that people don't do it? Don't have gender titles on these sorts of ideas, because someone somewhere is just going to turn it into a negative.
Well, given that, I mean, the most offensive word in the English language is a descriptor for a part of the female anatomy, I think that's all you need to say on this subject.
That's a very difficult word, Amanda. It's a very difficult word in Western Sydney because it's part of, particularly for blokes, it's part of the vernacular. And my partner will not say it in the house. It's just not a word that's ever shared in the house, and he would never use it in front of the ladies. But I'm very aware that when there are blokes together, that word.
Well, it was interesting, just on a complete side note, before we get to based on that particular topic, there was a road incident this week in Sydney, and without going into detail, because I'm sure the young person involved has been arrested and will be before the courts very soon, had a bumper sticker on a car that was involved in a fatality. I don't think we can say alleged. The person is actually deceased. That said, I drive like a C. And I just thought, I wonder what a woman's vagina's got to do. See, I've said it. A woman's vagina's got to do with their driving ability. Anyway, let's move on.
Well, I suppose in some ways it was completely apt.
God, oh my lordy wordy me. But anyway, and how it's allowed to be driven around. Anyway,
so let's talk lazy girl. Lady
girl, rather lady parts.
Lazy girl versus girl boss.
Yes.
So the idea of this lazy girl job, from what I can discern, is that it's people, and I'm going to use the word people, I'm not going to gender assign this one, but people looking for jobs that require minimal effort for decent pay and is time flexible. Now, I think 100% on heart that every single one of us would like to hardly do a thing, get well paid for it, and do it whenever the hell we want.
I think that goes back to the workhouses of Victorian England, doesn't it? Anything as an improvement on that was seen as a really desirable thing. So who doesn't want – look, we all think we're worth more than we're paid, all of us. Who wouldn't want to work less, get paid more, and do whatever you want?
I just
I
wonder
don't know
where
how it's a
these
new concept. But then you're
these
labelled,
jobs
you know.
are.
Yes, well, I have never found one, sadly.
I've never seen a job advertised that says, look, you don't have to work very hard. We're going to pay you loads of money and you can work whenever you want to. Never seen it.
No, and look, if anybody does, can they please let me know? Because even at my ripe old age, I'm all up for it.
So the other side of the equation is this idea of a girl boss. And a
Mm.
girl boss is somebody who's very career focused, who pushes themselves or promotes themselves into quite high pressured jobs where there are long hours. I would call them executive hours, and where they're really well paid. And the if we're talking about the USA, because this is where this trend is coming from.
I think it was a Forbes magazine
yeah,
article.
we saw the
wasn't
article
it? Yes,
in.
indeed.
The whole idea, it's about work-life balance. So the girl boss has no work-life imbalance. She's owned by her work, versus the lazy girl who says, I work to live, I don't live to work. And I'd just like to point out to all our young followers, if there are any, this is not a new concept.
No.
This is not
as my
new.
mother would always say whenever I brought something up, you didn't invent it,
It's not a new concept. It's been around forever.
Yeah. Well, look, we only just said earlier too that the concept of longevity changes with each generation. So back in the day, well before our generation, there was womb to tomb employment. You got a job. Quite often it was the bank. That was always very desirable. Where I was growing up, you got a job in the bank. And you were there until you got your gold watch and chain and you retired. Now, obviously that has changed. That has changed in my lifetime and your lifetime, Lisa. So I don't know. Does it mean that the pendulum swung so much that you just turn up for a couple of hours and do whatever you like and then just get paid an enormous sum of money, which is utterly ridiculous as well. So both ends of the spectrum.
I think we are in a tumultuous period of sort of industrial work relations. Yeah. If you go back in time, there was the period of time where the unions advocated for employees and we got the 40-hour working week. Before then, it was like
and now it's 38 hour.
And now it's 38 hour week. So there have been times where workers have generated quite significant change in employment conditions. That's happened in the past. And we could perhaps refer back to the AI discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago about how jobs will change. And it may very well end up that people are working in jobs that are less hours, are more flexible and pay well, simply because they can't be done by artificial
AI.
intelligence.
That's exactly right.
So it may be a trend that sort of just happens anyway. But if we would break it down in this instance, and we are talking about the US where they do not have the same rigorous industrial laws that we have here in Australia, it's about a desire for work-life balance and to reduce or to address the imbalance in power that corporations have over the working conditions and the lives of their employees.
You just need to label it with something else.
Yes.
Maybe that's just too long for a soundbite. Given that we basically click frenzies and a soundbite world that we all live in, you have to have a 2-word, if you want to call it a slogan, that people can click through. I don't know, it's just an appalling word.
But just imagine what was behind the idea of calling the desire for more work-life balance and, maybe less pressure a lazy girl job.
Well, first of all, the lazy is just offensive. But the girl thing, is it because come back to child rearing? The primary caregivers, and so they use the female there because they're the ones, because they're juggling. And look, predominantly a lot of that care is done by women, of course. But is that why it was done?
Do you know?
And girl is just
the word.
Girl.
The article that I read about it, and I have to admit, this is a TikTok viral trend, and I don't do the TikTok because I'm not of the generation that's age.
No, ditto.
But it's Gen Z. It's our youngest workers who are really driving it, and I don't think. Look, there's always exceptions, but no, it's not a parental push in it. It's actually a lifestyle thing of it. And here's the thing that interests me about that is I think that each generation of people, when they have children, you bring them up with the idea that they don't face the same hardships that you face, that they're more confident, they're more independent, they're more able to make choices.
And you've smoothed the way a little bit for them along the way.
So these Gen Zs are our children. And if they're advocating for this sort of thing, it's probably because we've empowered them to do this. We're just a little flummoxed by some of the labels that they give on stuff. And the idea bless, that perhaps they think they're inventing.
Yes.
Inventing this.
Look, every generation thinks that. Yes. Well, we're not Victorian England, thank goodness, and times have moved on. But maybe it's I don't know. So conditions are pretty good. By and large, it's pretty good. And a desire to improve what's already pretty good, that's when I get a bit flummoxed. So it's the pendulum moving even further to the other, looking for ways to improve. That's basically all I can really think that, Well, we had to work very much longer out purely because we didn't have the technology that enabled us to do things a lot quicker. So, for example, if you were trying to contact somebody out of hours, and I don't mean a colleague, but, maybe a client or something like that nature, you would go home and you would ring from your landline at home, or you'd just stay in the office longer so you could ring them because you didn't have mobile phones. Now, that's, technology, it moved. So, and of course, now the other side is we're working even longer because we've got the technology and you can contact. But that's what you just had to do.
And you're right, the jobs were different. Like you think about a secretarial role back in the day, because you were working from a typewriter, there were no pro formas. There were no templates that you could load up and you're just filling in the gaps. Whereas now with a lot of documentation that's used in corporate roles, people develop a template. And so they're just making small changes.
Not even in warehouses when you're actually, the movement of goods, you've actually got a template of how you go about that.
Which is very different.
I always think that, there's so many templates that get plagiarised. Someone sometime somewhere was really busy because we've used their templates ever since.
Yeah.
And they've just been rotated.
And they probably got nothing for it.
That's right. So a lot of the time.
Nothing got for it. So look, it's an interesting concept, but I kind of feel that it's just this. I feel like it's the younger generation discovering stuff that we already knew, and maybe people need to discover it in their own time. But it's a bit bemusing to us that are a little bit older and go, well, this has actually always been a thing. Like people have, like we started off with, every single one of us wants to be paid really well for doing very little work when we want to. That's a, if you went out to the world and you said, hands up everybody who wants to work 60 hours a week for pretty blimmin' average money, and you have to be in a specific location for that whole time, and you may have to sleep at your desk. Yet nobody's putting their hand up for that, unless they're doing it because it's seen as a pathway to executive roles.
So, but also we live in an age now of instant gratification. Now, once upon a time, you'd have to put a stamp on an envelope and put it in a mailbox. And I'd have to, I know in shows sometimes these red pillars, I've said to my son, that is called a postbox, Mum. So that's what it is. So, but you did a letter and then you waited for the reply, or you had appointment television. And look, I'm really glad things have changed from that. So that's great. But now I know even email seems very 20th century now, very 1990s. But if you send an email, there's an expectation something comes back straight away. Now, to do that even faster, then when Twitter was that fast response time. So is it because they want, and I can see it, if you've only ever been surrounded by that, you want an instant response, instant gratification. And so maybe that's come from the fact that, well, they want it now. Well, we always have, want to be an executive tomorrow, purely because of this the manner in which even the brains have grown now that you get a reply or a response immediately.
On that, Manda, let's take a small break.
Good.
And we'll be back shortly.
We'll do it slowly. Great.
At P2P, you will have a tailored consultant that has an expert knowledge in a particular industry.
We have great technology in place. We have a really great relationships with lots of different clients and a lot of candidates in the market. We have specialist consultants within the team.
Internationally recognised, so there is an opportunity to collaborate with many different branches. But from a proactive perspective, we are able to answer clients' needs.
I'm really proud of what we stand for and how we operate. We always operate with integrity, professionalism, and we really pride ourselves on providing the best service to our client.
And we're back. Lisa's had her drink of water, as it were. Now, just off air, we were having a bit of a chat about who can't work from home and lifestyle flexibility. And there's plenty of positions and jobs out there that just don't have that ability.
Yeah. So it's really an issue for quite a, well, I wouldn't say it's a small part of the working population, but it is
not everyone works in an office.
Exactly right.
On a laptop.
Exactly right. Now, I'm sure that there are lots of people, I'm sure there are lots of tradies who would love to only do easy jobs, actually, that's what they do now I think about it. We all want to live a tradie lifestyle.
I had one at my house yesterday. It was excellent.
Yeah.
But, as we were saying, look, we were just also laughing during COVID, when work from home came the big thing, and which has obviously continued. And that fabulous cartoon where you've got people sitting in an aeroplane and the captain, this is your captain speaking, I've decided to work from home today. And people say, I thought it was terrific. So it made me think, well, look, all our caregivers, irrespective where, as teachers, anybody that requires to be physically present, our warehouse workers, they can't say work-life balance for them is having a day off. It's not, I'm going to work from home. It's not possible.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And the other thing that I think it just sort of came to me was this whole idea of, the lazy job where you're working minimal amount of effort for decent money and you're flexible in hours. It does fly in the face of our unemployment rate. So for people who don't understand how in Australia how we calculate the unemployment rate, it's a fairly complicated beast. But one of the things that the Australian Bureau of Statistics looks at is something called underemployment. So these are people who have jobs but would like more hours. So they're working but they're not getting enough shifts. To meet what their demands are, which is why we hear about people working 2 and 3 jobs, particularly now when we're in, I suppose from a consumer point of view, it's kind of a recession, but, so people are working multiple jobs. The underemployment rate has not shifted, even though our unemployment rate is quite low.
Well, unemployment went from 3.9 to 4.1 this week.
Did it?
So it's still
up a
little bit. Yeah,
but it's still very low.
Yeah, it is.
And considering the desirable rate that the RBA would like would be 6%. But anyway, so 4.1%. But the underemployment rate tends to stay. I think I've only ever seen it drop once over the last few years. But other than that, it's usually quite consistent, which indicates people want more work. So this whole idea of a lazy girl thing, I think it's very niche.
I thought it's very it's a real paradox. Yeah.
It's very specific to perhaps certain jobs. It's not reflecting what's actually happening in the job market and in the industrial employment space within Australia. Because yes, we'd all like to work less, earn more for working less. But what actually is happening is that people aren't getting enough hours.
Yeah. And beggars the question, who do they talk to and what jobs do they work in for that particular article?
Yeah, well, I do want
It's
to
not
say
our
that
experience here, that's for sure.
that at the end of it, they were talking about graphics design and marketing.
Yeah.
I won't look at our producer. I don't want to make eye contact on that one. But
But that's exactly right.
It's
yeah.
very much in that creative
Yeah,
space for
yeah,
those people.
yeah.
They're the kind of people that can absolutely dictate what, they can be freelancers. They can dictate what work
And they
do.
go for the work that interests them.
Yep.
Not quite often it's not for a stability factor. It's actually the work that interests them. So they
Yeah.
will leave a job if it's because they're just that creative mindset. Well, I mean, I don't relate to that at all, but
I also think, there was in that article, there was one example of a young woman who left quite a high pressure corporate role in marketing, and she went and worked for a company where she lives in a van that's powered by solar power, and she just goes and lives in the desert and gets paid for doing it. Well, there aren't that many jobs out there that allow you to live in a solar powered van in the middle of the desert. Good luck to her. Well done.
Excellent.
I don't think we should be encouraging our children to aspire to that level of job.
And getting back to the instant gratification, is it living for the now? Is it because, there's certainly been very big headlines here in Australia about the housing crisis, not enough homes and units to house people, and the price, particularly in areas where there are a lot of jobs, it's pricing people out of the market. And so I don't know whether they've come to the conclusion they can't buy a place, so they'll just live for the now. But of course, obviously the rents are just incredibly, the demand for places is so high, which obviously mean the supply is low, and that means the money for rents is just enormously high, and the competition for these places. So is it because we think, well, I'm never going to be able to afford to buy a house, so I'll just live for the now and I'll just get instantly gratified. I can just get instant gratification and I can have my avocado toast and eat it too.
I think that a few years ago, when the housing crisis was not quite so pronounced, that people may have been able to make that argument, but I don't know, because people still need a roof over their head.
Absolutely.
So I think
that was just the cost to buy. Now the big shift has been the fact the rent has just been so difficult.
It's
even as our Prime Minister found out this week.
Yeah.
A tenant that he'd given 90 days, which he's perfectly entitled to do. Just, I would have thought maybe his political advisors in his office might have said it may not have looked great to come out in budget week. But it's
it's a difficult one.
You're perfectly entitled to whatever.
I'm exactly right, because I think it's a difficult one. If you own an investment property and for some reason you want to sell it, you should be able to sell it.
Yeah.
And
I think the issue was around the fact that there was 90 days notice, and the tenant felt that it should be longer. But anyway, it made a splash because
he's the Prime Minister.
Right, that's exactly right. So you have to, you can't just look in because his personal circumstances have changed, and congratulations to him and Jody.
And I think it's only an issue, right? Because there's such a shortage of
exactly
property.
Right. And it made news. This week.
That the young man who was renting his place, he's fretting because where does he go?
That's right.
And
he doesn't said 90 days is not enough.
He's facing the same issue as everybody else.
That's right. And he's a small business owner, and that's exactly right. And so yes, so obviously there's been a lot of talk then about migration and where the house we're going to be. There's been a lot of NIMBYism as well. Loads.
Everybody wants more housing, but not in to me.
And that's exactly right. So it's the same as the wind farms and whatever. That yes, we need plenty of that on it, but just not in my electorate.
Not where I can see them.
That's right.
Not
So
where I can
there's
see
going to
them.
have to be a happy medium about that somewhere. How do we get onto that? But you're right. So that is a big issue, and that is one thing that we are very aware of with those younger ones coming up behind us. Very much that those pressures that they've got. That now there's always been an element of pressure of it, finding a roof over your head, but it's just not as pronounced as it is currently.
And I fully
and money is still pretty cheap. It's just the fact that the cost of these things has just gone through the roof.
It's ridiculous. I bought my house in Western Sydney just over 10 years ago, and it's more than doubled in value. great investment from my perspective, but
I always say, but if you wanted to sell it and move to somewhere else, you've got to find it, and then the cost of moving is enormous, and you've still got to stump up. So,
and look, the reason I'm going to talk about personally
Mm.
is that I bought my house because I'd just been divorced, and we had sold our marital property, and we were taking half the money each.
Yeah.
And I looked at how much money I had, and I was not living in Western Sydney at that point. The only place I could reasonably afford a house at that time was in Western Sydney. I had a good job, I was earning good money, but that's where I could afford. If that happened to me today and I had to pay over $800,000 for the same house, could I even afford it?
Yeah. Well, the thing, as I said, the going back in all that time, and I always say that life's upside down, because looking to get into the property market when it was in the 1980s, interest rates were just enormous, and then being at the other end of my career now, and we're looking to retire, interest rates were pretty much zero. So I thought, well, I got that wrong. So, because I remember my father retired in the 80s, and with those horrific interest rates, he didn't even have to touch his superannuation because his bank account, just a little old savings account, was about 17% interest. I mean, I can't even, So I was at the other end of the scale, so he had it right, and I certainly had it wrong. So money is still cheap. Even I know interest rates have gone up. But the problem is that the properties that you are wanting to buy and the mortgages that you have to secure are big.
Huge.
Very, very big.
Like terrifyingly
and therefore
big.
It just means that even at 5 and a bit percent, that's the same rate, they'll probably be, in some cases 6%. A lot of them are coming off fixed to get onto variable now, which is another slug. It's just that the amounts are so much larger.
Yeah.
And so when you're saying, and this probably also comes through with the underemployment area that you were talking about, Lisa. And so, the paradox of saying, well, people want a work-life balance, but we're finding the underemployed. I really wish we could get a lot more gutsy stats, and maybe they're there and I just haven't seen them, on underemployment. And the reason why, and is it because, we've always talked about insecure employment, but there's not most employment is secure now.
I think we can make the mistake at looking things from a corporate perspective. And the majority of Australians are employed in small to medium businesses.
They are.
And those businesses are particularly vulnerable
absolutely.
to the economic outlook. Like we are, that there are cafes closing, that there are small businesses that are closing because customers aren't buying coffees.
That's right.
They're not buying, they're not going out and buying lunch. They're not getting takeout, all of that stuff because of cost of living. That has a direct impact on those businesses.
And that's right.
And it has a direct impact on how many people those businesses employ and how many shifts they can offer. So I think that there is, there's just that really direct relationship that we're kind of protected a bit from in corporate level, because there is that more stability. For small businesses need flexibility. We don't want to stop people going into business because they have to employ permanent staff. You have to be able to employ casuals, and you have to be able to ramp up and decrease your staff numbers based on how your business is performing.
Right. And in Australia, the definition of a small business is under 15 full-time equivalents.
Yeah.
So anybody over that, there's not even really, there might be I don't think there's a legal definition of a medium-sized business and large. It's just that anything under 15 and under is small.
Yeah.
So they have some not as onerous requirements for some IR, industrial relations legislation and that kind of thing. But you're right, it's they're at the mercy, so they have longer probation periods for staff and whatever. But you're right, and because they're small, they just can't put on a whole permanent workforce. They need the flexibility of people being able to come and go.
So I think that if we were to drill down on it, I think there would be a direct correlation between underemployment and small to medium businesses really suffering in the current cost of living crisis that we're experiencing.
Well, yes, you're right. I guess it also, they can't ramp up quite as easily. They don't have the economies of scale that an organisation maybe the size of, say, our organisation has as well.
And they often don't have the savings.
No. Well,
they can't fall back on.
Well, where they go into voluntary administrations because they can't pay their super and they can't pay their PAYG or their employees' tax requirements that they're meant to remit.
Amanda, it's time for us to wrap up
today. We are. I am going to just on one happy point that the Webby Awards were being on the United States. We'll stay there for a stateside moment. Webby Awards, which are all the podcast awards. And I was very pleased that Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who needs no plugging from us, her website won a prestigious award, which is Women Are Wiser Than Me. And she speaks to some fabulous women. Obviously, some of them you're going to like more than others. And I think, as you know, my personal favourite, Fran Leibowitz, who I've spoken about before. But so she actually won. So I thought, yes. So,
did you see that soundbite, like the little?
Yes, I did. I did. I did see that. Yes. So look it up.
Listen to the older women.
Yes. Yes, that's right. So listen to old women. So on that very, very happy note, we will see you next week. Bye. And of course, if you would like to listen to the SkirtWork podcast, you can find us anywhere where you get your podcasts. And you can also watch us on YouTube, heaven forbid. Lisa and I would much prefer this to be audio, but no, we're being videoed as well. So please subscribe, send us a comment. We would love to hear from you.